The Neil Prendeville Show. Weekdays from 9 a.m. 104 to 106. Red FM.
Simon, good morning.
Hi Neil, how are you?
Very well. It's a bit like the weather forecast I'm reading, mist and fog, which seems to be the very same with the convention centre. Still enveloped in a mist and fog. Where are we at? I expected you to be making an announcement on it this morning, but nothing.
Did you? Okay. Well,
yeah, I thought that you'd use the opportunity to say we'd agreed extra funding and they're going to get on with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, funding isn't the issue. Remaining true to the legalities of the process is important now, because we want to make sure that any new agreement isn't challenged by anybody. We've been through nearly 4 years, as you know. Everyone is frustrated that it isn't being built right now. So am I. But I'm trying to make sure that once we do finally get this across the line, that everything stacks up. So essentially, I mean, in simple terms, this is a project that at the start was going to cost 50 million euros. It's now going to cost somewhere between 75 and 80 million probably. And over the last number of months, we have tried to ensure that all of the different stakeholders here are going to contribute extra money to make this happen. So Live Nation in principle have agreed to put more than 30 million in, which is what they previously agreed to. BAM have said that they will put money in directly, even though they're not going to own the project, they're simply going to build it. And the state is going to have to put more money in, clearly, to make it happen. That doesn't happen easily. You know, you don't simply add an extra 10 million euros of public money without going through a process.
But why does it take so long?
It's spent properly.
Why is it taking so long?
Because we had to figure out a way to pay for the extra cost. That was the first thing. You know, when BAM won the competitive tendering process to build the event centre on the Brewery Quarter site, the state was willing to put 20 million euros in at that point, 8 million from City Hall and 12 million from central government. Clearly now we're going to have to up that contribution significantly. And so in order for us to do that, we needed to be satisfied that the costings were right. And BAM and Live Nation have spent the last essentially 18 months on detailed internal design work and costings to make sure that they're not going to come back halfway through the building of this project looking for another 10 or 15 million euros from government, because that's not going to happen.
Your fear is that if you give them 10 more, they may come back again looking for even more again.
Well, I mean, before we sign up to anything, I think the developers will have to make sure that they satisfy the state that they are taking the risk. And one of the reasons why we're being as careful as we are now is to make sure that doesn't happen.
But what about those that are accusing BAM of holding the city and the government to ransom? That they literally have everybody over a barrel on this one, and they can keep pushing for more funding because nobody's going to take the contract back from them.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's an easy sort of criticism to make, but I think it's wrong. I mean, BAM have put literally millions into this site and haven't got anything back from it yet at all. So they have to answer to their board as well in the Netherlands. So, you know, I have been frustrated by the length of time it's taken to make decisions, and I've obviously been very frustrated that since we turned the sod, essentially the economics of this project have totally changed in terms of the cost of building it. And in many ways, I've been, and the government has been blamed for those delays, I would say unfairly. But having said all that...
Well, why is that? I mean, you came down and stood up for this photograph, which let me ask you straight up, do you regret that photograph now?
No, I don't, because, you know, we can only act in good faith. And at the time, we were going to be building an event centre for 50 million euros, and the state was putting in 20 into that. We're now going to be building an event centre for closer to 80 million euros, and the state will be putting more money in. But, you know, we wanted to make sure that project had momentum and full commitment from all the stakeholders. And I do think it has helped that we had a very public commitment to this project from BAM, from Live Nation, with the Taoiseach, with me, with the Tanaiste and everybody else who was there that day. And I think that has helped us get over a very difficult 2 years since then in terms of keeping people committed to this project when it is proving much more expensive than people originally thought. And I mean, don't forget, Neil, we've had a whole series of false dawns on event centres in Cork. There was supposed to be one in Mahon, it didn't happen. There was supposed to be one near the train station, it didn't happen there. There was supposed to be one on the quays in the Dockland area. That didn't happen either, because actually when the economics of building it didn't stack up, the projects fell apart. We haven't allowed that happen this time. Yes, it's been delayed, but it has not fallen apart. We're very close to now finalising and announcing a full funding package to make this happen.
How close is close? I mean, how close is close?
Well, I've said that, I'm hopeful we'll be able to get this done in the next couple of weeks. I'm not going to give you an exact day because I'm not the only decision maker here. Live Nation needs to get their final approval from the US, which I understand is underway, and they're very confident that they'll get. We need to get approval from the Department of Public Expenditure, from Pascal Donoghue. He has to make sure that he can stand over full value for money in terms of expenditure on this project, because it's a significant amount of money. And of course, Cork City Hall and the management there, in my view, have done a really, really good job on this, because they've been hugely frustrated by the delays. They need to make sure that the process that we put in train 4 years ago still stands, and that people don't challenge that process and look to start it all over again. And I think we've got the right legal advice that we need to make sure that we are remaining true to the process and that it stands up. So, what I'd say to people who are listening is, I know people will say, look, we've heard all this before. That was an election stunt. It actually wasn't an election stunt. The reason why I wanted to make sure that we turned the sod before that election was because I had no guarantee that I'd be a minister or I'd be in government after the election.
But those kind of stunts help you with that. Help you get re-elected.
It did. I mean, it wasn't a great election for Fine Gael, so I'm not sure it did. But I think what it did do is it committed a Taoiseach at the time to making this project happen through public funding support for Cork. And that commitment has helped us now ensure that the politics of this hasn't allowed the government to allow this project collapse. And we haven't. And I have had... So
you won't let it collapse at any price then?
Anything else.
Is that it? You won't let it collapse at any price?
No. Well, of course there are limits, which is why, first of all, our legal advice is very clear that the previous commitment of 20 million euros to build this event centre means that we can increase the state's contribution by about 10 million, up to 30 million. But beyond that, the recommendation is that we would have to look at a new process. So that puts limits and it puts parameters around what the state can do from a funding perspective. But to put another 10 million euros into a project is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that
especially when you don't own it, though. Does that concern you? That's 30 million euro of taxpayers' money for something we don't own.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, what we want is the best event management company on the planet to be operating this. And in order for that proposition to happen, they're putting 30 to 35 million euros into this project of private money from Live Nation. And, that's got to buy them something.
Well, in the private sector, that would be a 50-50 partnership on the ownership.
Yeah, and the state gets... I can tell you more than 50% of the benefit of this project, because Cork City is going to have a 6,000-seater event centre that's probably going to be full 4 or 5 times a week, which is going to drive commerce in the city in a part of the city that I think can really do with it.
All right, I agree with that. You're saying we're down to a matter of weeks then?
Restaurants and so on.
You're down to a matter of weeks.
Well, I mean, that's the hope, and I will happily come on and talk you through the detail of the numbers when it's finalised. But I don't want to take any decisions for granted.
We need this, and we need other work like it, because I've been hearing more and more in the last few months is that Limerick is overtaking Cork, and that you look at Dublin, where everything seems to be Dublin centric. We get scraps down here, and even less for the rest of the country. Why were you in Cork? There's this cynicism over the weekend about this major announcement of all of this money, the millions and millions and billions actually, into national and regional roads and all of these acute hospital beds and money for climate change and innovation hubs for Cork and stuff like that. Yeah. The cynicism is that much of this was promised already, and this is another election stunt.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a cheap shot, to be honest. Some of these projects, of course, have been announced already.
Yeah, 179 of them, apparently.
Yeah, but Neil, just let me answer the question. Like, you don't announce a package of 116 billion euros in one go. Like, this is a 10-year plan. The first 4 or 5 years of that are linked to the last capital plan, which was announced back in 2015. And so some of the projects that were announced then, of course, need to continue to be funded to get them completed. You know, the M28, the M22, the Dunkettle Interchange, the M20, all of these projects have been talked about. But there was only funding in the last plan to get them started. We now have a full funding package to get them all finished. So, you know, this idea that this is a sort of, unfortunately, I think it reflects on the way in which politics has been done in the past, that people just see this as a list of projects to announce before an election. This is a 20-year development plan for the country. It's talking about totally changing Cork's place in how Ireland as a country develops, becoming much larger, becoming a much bigger counterbalance to Dublin. We're talking about Cork having a population as a city of in and around 340,000 people in the next 2 decades.
Let's look at that.
We have a population in the city of 120,000.
Okay, let's look at that. 340,000 people with housing and spiralling rents, builders who won't build because they say there's no profit, landlords won't rent to HAP or to families or single parents, call centres and IT have, wait a second, they've hoovered up all the existing tenancies. What are the government and local councils doing about that?
Look, Neil, I mean, it looks like you've written down a list of all the negatives you can find to raise this morning.
Well, I'll tell you what I am doing. I get an opportunity to talk to you about things that listeners to this programme talk to me about all of the time.
What we're talking about here is getting to a point where we're building between 25,000 and 35,000 housing units a year every year to serve a growing population. We're going to have a population that's growing by at least 50,000 a year every year. Right? So what we're doing is we launched 2 plans together on Friday. The first is what's called a national planning framework, whereby we know that in the next 2 decades there'll be an extra 1 million people in Ireland. Now, where are they all going to live? And as you say, where are they going to get houses? If they want to rent, where are they going to rent? Is it going to be affordable for them? Are they going to be able to live close to where they're working? Are they going to be able to get the bus into work if they want to? Are we going to see the continuing sprawl that we saw over the last 30 years, where we see simply houses being built on greenfield sites where towns like Carrigaline and Ballincollig just expand and expand into farmland, essentially? Or are we going to take a different approach towards how we develop our cities and towns by building much higher quality, much higher buildings so that people can live in the city centre and move around, walk to work, cycle to work, get better public transport, and put those transport systems and networks
But they're social houses.
To improve the quality of life.
They're social houses you're referring to.
No, I'm not talking about social houses. I'm talking about private houses and social houses side by side. I've talked to you before about the need to not to put all of the social housing in one part of the city and all of the private housing in other parts of the city. We need to have mixed development.
But nobody's building housing estates. The builders don't want to build housing estates. All you see really is apartment blocks for.
Like there are 800 houses being built in Carrigaline as we speak. You know, just so we are starting to build again. There were 19,000 housing units connected to the ESB last year. We're seeing housing starts up 48%. We're seeing planning applications up 50% as well. So we are seeing a dramatic scaling up. The problem is that for the last 10 years we haven't been building houses, and there's been a population growth during that period of time, and so now we're playing catch up. And the big question is, where do we build the houses, and how do we ensure that Cork plays its part in terms of building a city that is more sustainable than what we've done in the past?
But the city,
the last boom.
But the
city's population didn't increase.
But the city is dying. The city's facing competition online. It's facing competition from Blackpool, Douglas, Mahon, Wilton. It's killing the city. Parking charges, issues like that.
Neil, the city is not dying. Right? If you speak to the traders, this is the best Christmas that they've had in a decade that's just passed. But we need to build on that. But let's not talk ourselves down. What we're talking about here is, first of all, we're changing the city boundary. okay, so that the city has room to expand and grow, and also has economies of scale in terms of how it's managed. So the city boundary will be changed in law in the coming weeks, and the population of the city will go from 130,000 people up to about 220,000 people. And that, in some ways, is an artificial population growth because it's just changing the boundary, but it's taking in places like Douglas and Grange, and Donnybrook, because they are effectively part of the city now anyway in terms of commuting.
This may not be an issue for you. All right, I understand that the boundary change will happen, and it is very much a paper exercise.
The reason for that, Neil,
but hold on a second.
Just let me make this point. The reason why we're changing the boundary is not to stand still. The reason why we're changing the boundary is that we want to create a proper counterbalance to Dublin in terms of economies of scale, which is why we are going to see probably about 14,000 people living along the docklands on the north and the south shores of the Lee in the future. That is why we're talking about the level of infrastructural investment that we announced last week, so that we can see cities like Cork increasing in population terms by about 60%, so that we're up over 300,000 people in Cork, which creates economies of scale and business activity that can create a proper counterbalance to Dublin.
Okay.
We're going to see a growth in Cork, which is the equivalent of Waterford, Limerick and Galway combined. That's the level of ambition that we have now in this plan.
Yeah,
and that's going to mean new schools, new hospitals, extensions to UCC and CIT and other further education facilities, effectively 3 new hospitals for the city, an elective hospital, a dental hospital.
Wait a second. UCC is enormous. It's just gone way too big for the city. I know you're Tanaiste, I know you're a senior minister, but you're also a local TD. You're aware of the carry-on over Rag Week, year in, year out. You're aware of the people who have to live with the carry-on of the students. You're suggesting it's going to get bigger and there's going to be even more of them?
Well, I think UCC will get bigger, but I think they have a responsibility to make sure that students behave properly. But what we're talking about actually is moving towards more purpose-built student accommodation, which I think will help with what you're just outlining. But we're also talking about a new strategic investment in a new international business school for UCC, which is going to be a €100 million project, and the state is going to put about 30 million into that. That's going to happen probably on one of 2 sites in the city centre, which is going to be really good for business, for cafes, for pubs, for clubs, for retail outlets, because you're going to see a lot of new students actually living in the city centre in purpose-built student accommodation, and many of them will be around the event centre as well, as you would expect, because they'll be part of the festivities. Are
you talking just 1 or 2 points before I let you go? You talk about the increase of the city and the bigger the suburbs increase, but we have a very inadequate and unreliable bus service. I don't hear any mention of taking on Dublin with regards to a Lewis or a Dart or a light rail system.
Well, you haven't read the report then, because first of all, there's €200 million committed to improving Cork's bus system and service. It's called a Cork Connects project. So you'll see a lot more bus priority lanes, integrated ticketing systems, integrating with the commuter rail that comes in, particularly from the eastern side of the city, from Cove. But you'll also see a plan for a new light rail system for Cork. So the obvious route for that is from the Docklands to Ballincollig, linking up CIT, UCC, the city centre, Cork University Hospital, and the...
When will that happen?
Population that live along that route.
When will the first light rail system happen?
Well, look, we've got a plan for it first, Neil. You don't commit money without having a plan.
Oh, so it's just a notion then, is it?
We do have it's mentioned specifically
when?
As something that Cork needs to do.
Oh, so it is an aspiration then. It's not a plan.
Look, Neil, you can be cynical about this.
I'm not being cynical. I'm being accurate. You don't have a date for it. I ask you about a light rail system, and you have aspirations for one.
Because this is what's called a national planning framework. What it does is it gives a very clear instruction to local government to get on and do things that are consistent with the national planning framework. What follows from this then is city development plans and county development plans that are consistent with the national planning framework. That's what this does. You're not seriously suggesting that I'd be itemising now for the next 10 years where all the schools in Cork are going to be built and all the schools are going to be extended and so on. That kind of planning needs to happen at a local government level or at a department level. What we launched last week was a planning framework that requires Cork City Council and Cork County Council to now work.
Yeah, but you're agreeing it's... Oh, no, I understand. You're agreeing it's needed, but there's
we then have a funding package, right, which is for the next 10 years, which is going to fund all of the new road networks that we need to build, from the M20 to the M22 to the M28 to the Dunkettle interchange to new bridges across the city, opening up the docklands and so on. And there is a strong signal here that if a light rail system is justified and if it can work, well then of course the funding will flow from that. But we have to put that work in place first to make sure that it's justified above and beyond what's going to happen in the €200 million investment in buses.
What about investment in
about a progressive and sustainable way of planning over a long-term period for the city, which is something that we have never done in Cork very well, with the exception maybe of the Lutz plan.
What about the problems regarding closed Garda stations and a lack of Gardaí? More and more I've been talking with people who call Garda stations and they're closed or their calls are redirected. It's been a 40% rise in house burglaries on Leaside year on year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that's a big issue for the town I live in Carrigaline, but it's
very much so in Carrigaline.
Generally, yeah, no, absolutely. We've seen what the guards refer to as a spike in.
So your local Garda stations close most of the time.
It's not actually closed most of the time. It's open most of the time, but we are looking at whether we need to increase the Garda presence on the south side of the city in places like Grange, Frankfield, Douglas and Carrigaline to respond to a spike in burglaries. That is true, and I've spoken to the Chief Superintendent about that only last week. So we're looking at the need for increased resources to respond to that. There is unfortunately a gang at the moment on the south side of the city which the guards are looking to get on top of quickly, but they have been involved in a lot of burglaries, and the guards are very aware of it, and we'll make sure that they get the resources to deal with it.
Yeah, how do you know that they could be coming in and out on the highways that we have and up and down the motorway?
And that's what good policing is about, which is why the guards need to anticipate that and use the intelligence that they have. But at the moment, clearly there is a lot of annoyance and frustration, and I've got that in my office on the main street in Carrigaline because there have been burglaries. There's been a significant spike in burglaries recently, and people are aware of that, and they want it resolved. And then
there is also the added issue of when they're caught. There's a soft sentencing policy in the Irish courts when it comes to crimes like these. You see an awful lot of people committing these crimes when they're out on bail.
I'm not sure that's true, actually. I'm not sure that our...
Well, I don't know what world you're living in, but it's certainly true to people who talk to me on this programme.
Yeah, no, but I mean, you can only compare with other countries in terms of benchmarks as to what's...
Well, invariably the crimes are related to... there's an increasing scourge of drugs. You're aware of that, not just heroin, but spice, benzos, illegal pharmachem from overseas, black market trade and prescription drugs on Leaside, people buying and selling stuff they get from doctors. This is being used as an excuse for fellas when they're up before the judge.
This is why we're investing in significantly more Gardaí. So we will see thousands of more young people join the ranks of An Garda Síochána in the next few years. We have a target of 15,000. So we'll see that benefiting Cork as well as other parts of the country as we see the numbers of people in uniform increasing on our streets. And that needs to happen with a growing population, because we are talking about a dramatic growth in population in Cork over the next 10 to 20 years, the likes of which we've never seen, actually, in the city, and indeed in the county. So if you look at the plan that we launched last week, what we're talking about is about an extra 115,000 extra people in the city once the boundaries have been withdrawn.
Yeah. I know, we made that point. Yeah, I know.
And we're talking about approximately another 100,000 people in Cork County as well. So you're talking about Cork City and County as a region of taking over 200,000 extra people in the next 20 years, which is a very...
I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about crime. Incidentally, we called Carrigaline Garda Station just at 10 minutes to 10 last week, and we were put through to Toca Garda Station, and they said Carrigaline Station, and I quote, opens around 2 o'clock and stays open till about 5. So your local Garda Station is open 3 hours and 24.
Yeah, no, well, look, it depends where the guards are.
No, you said it's open most of the time. I'm telling you that it's not. It's open 3 hours a day.
It's open for more than 3 hours a day, but sometimes the station needs...
What part of around 2 and stays open till 5 do you not understand?
It often stays open beyond 5 o'clock, Neil. But sometimes the Garda station needs to close early if the guards need to go out on the beat, or if they're on a job. And that's not unusual in Garda stations or on the outskirts.
So is it acceptable if you call Cove Gardaí or Carrigaline Gardaí, you're answered by Toker? If you call, say, for instance, Grana Braher...
That's because Toker manages the southern region.
If you call Ballincollig, you get through to Grana Braher. You call Douglas Garda Station, you don't get answer at all. Nobody answered the phone.
Neil, you seem to be determined to focus on one thing to try and find a negative here in this interview, with respect. My job is to get the resources we need to get more guards.
But I'm giving you might be able to take, but you could take this back. You could take this back to Dublin and tell them when you call Middleton Garda Station, you get no answer.
Neil, politicians don't micromanage Garda stations. The Garda Commissioner does that, and the Chief Superintendent in Cork does that. He speaks to me when he needs more resources. We are looking at getting more resources so that we can see an increased Garda presence on the south side of the city, including in Carrigaline.
I know, but it's important that you know of the Garda stations that aren't answering.
You speak to the guards about the actual policing management of individual stations.
Yeah, but you need to know this.
Yeah, sure, of course I know it. I live in Carrigaline. I have an office on the main street. People walk in and talk to us every day. There's a huge amount of annoyance.
But if you call Carrigaline Garda Station right now, you're going to be answered by Toker.
Yes, and you'll get a response from a guard in Carrigaline, which is the important thing. Not to have somebody sitting behind a desk in a Garda station. You want someone in a Garda car calling to your house. I know, but to your shop.
But I'm asking you I'm asking you, is it fit for purpose?
Where the switchboard is. You're talking about where the switchboard is. So the important thing is that we have a response capacity in the guards.
But why have them at all? Why call Grana Braher Garda Station, as we did earlier this morning, and get through to Anglesey Street? I mean, you'd be dizzy the way your call would be different. Is that fit for purpose? That's what I'm asking. You call these Garda stations, get answered by other ones.
You have to ask the Gardaí themselves about that. Their focus is actually on solving crime and supporting people within communities and getting out there, rather than actually being in a Garda station behind the desk. What you're talking about is where the switchboard operates, where actually people's concerns and queries and demands are responded to. If you're in Carrigaline today and you make a phone call, a 999 phone call, or you ring the Garda station in Carrigaline and get put through to Toker, the important thing is that you get the response that you need from the guards, and that we focus the human resources on responding to people's needs in the community, whether their shop has been vandalised or whether there's been a burglary that somebody wants to report. That's the key thing. But if the guards need more resources, and they do, then it's up to the government to try to provide more resources. That is what we are doing. We are providing a lot more guards, and we are providing significant capital to actually add to the existing equipment that the guards have already. But the actual policing itself is a matter for the Garda Commissioner.
Okay. I won't dwell on that because I made the points of that. I just want to finish up because one of the big stories at the moment, of course, is the issue involving the Eighth Amendment and the 12 weeks unlimited access for any reason. Is that as close to the wording as we're going to get right now, or am I? I sent a letter to I sent you an email, and your person came back to me and said that I was wrong, that I don't even know what the wording is, and that I should wait until I have the correct wording.
Well, I'm not quite sure what they said to you, but we don't know what the wording is.
I was asking for you. Subsequently, you did come out and say how you felt about it, but at the time I was wondering how you would vote if it was 12 weeks unlimited access.
Yeah, but that's not what we're voting on.
That's what he said to me, and I know that.
So I think it's important that you report accurately in relation to the question that people are going to be asked. Right. The issue here is, do we change the Constitution? Do we take the language out of the Constitution that is currently so restrictive that it means that if a woman's health is at serious risk through pregnancy, that she cannot have a termination in Ireland and therefore has to travel for that? Is that okay? It's not okay for me. And so what I will be asking people to do is to vote in favour of removing the wording from the Constitution that is as restrictive as it is today, And separately then, there will be legislation that will come through the Oireachtas to ensure that we legislate accurately to support women through crisis pregnancy when interventions are needed, but that there is also obviously a support from the state as well for an unborn child, which I think is also very important. But if the state has to make a choice in terms of protecting and supporting the health of a woman in pregnancy, then in my view they should do that. And we have had many, many tragic cases of women who have had to make very lonely and very stressful journeys to protect their own health needs in pregnancy, because we couldn't do it here because the Constitution is so restrictive. And that is why I'm saying to people, the proposition will be to remove Article 43.3 from the Constitution, to put a wording into the Constitution which essentially says that the Oireachtas can legislate for this issue, and then obviously the Simon Harris, the Minister for Health, will produce a draft piece of legislation, or what's called the draft heads of a piece of legislation, so that people will get an idea of what that legislation will look like in the future. And, we're going to have a number of months to debate and discuss these issues, but I think because they're so sensitive and because so many people will make decisions privately on the basis of their own experiences through pregnancy, then I think we all have a responsibility to be really sensitive in terms of how we comment on this issue. Right. So that people can make an informed, accurate choice in terms of what they're being asked to do.
Local TDs I have a report back from local TDs on Leeside, and it's actually tied. 7 are saying that they would vote to allow for terminations up to 12 weeks. 7 have said they would not.
You're talking about two different things, Neil.
And
here.
4 have said no. 4 have said they haven't made their minds up. So it seems to be like the recent survey over the weekend, almost like a 50-50 tie, isn't it?
No, because again, you're misrepresenting the question. There are two parts to this process. The first is, and the only thing that people will be voting on is whether or not you want to take this out of the Constitution because of the impact that it's had, over the last 30 years. In other words, do you want to take the wording relating to abortion out of the Constitution so that we can deal with the complexity of that issue through legislation? What you're talking about is how people say they'll vote in relation to what's in the legislation, which is a separate issue to the actual to the referendum question itself. In other words, there will be no question that's put to people that involves the 12-week issue. What people will be asked is, do you want to take the wording out of the Constitution that is as restrictive as it is, or don't you? And if people say yes to that, well, then it'll be up to the Oireachtas to legislate appropriately.
But will that legislative point then involve termination up to 12 weeks without restriction?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. What's in the legislation.
But that's what's being talked about, isn't it? In favour or not of repealing?
Yes.
And then
that's why I'm saying I think people are
legislating
the two issues.
But let's say we're not confusing it. Let's say they repeal the wording and then we would legislate. What would we be legislating for if it's not 12 weeks unrestricted?
Well, we'll be the basis of the legislation will be consistent with the recommendations of the committee. But of course, the Oireachtas have the opportunity to amend or change that if they want to.
Okay, and the committee has said 12 weeks unrestricted.
No, what the committee has said is that there wouldn't be a restriction as to reason, but that they would be that abortions would have to legally take place in consultation with the GP.
I know, but the timescale, Simon.
But there wouldn't be. There wouldn't be. Now, I've said I have some difficulties with that recommendation, as have others. And that is why there will be a legislative process and a very long debate and committee stages.
But if it were to come down to a vote, how would you vote if it were 12-week unrestricted?
Neil, we can't do any of this. In other words, we can't legislate appropriately to help women and also to ensure that pregnancies are protected as well. We can't do any of that unless we change the Constitution. We will be stuck with the legislation that we have.
I know that, but
protection of life in pregnancy issue.
I'm saying if that were, like, Jonathan O'Brien answered my question, Billy Kelleher answered my question, Micheál Martin answered my question, Michael McGrath answered my question. Why won't you?
What question?
In the event of the repealing the Constitution and having a vote to change and allow abortion and termination in Ireland up to 12 weeks unrestricted, how would you vote on it? Jonathan O'Brien said he would vote yes. Billy Kelleher says he would vote yes. Micheál Martin says he would vote yes. Michael McGrath says he would vote no.
I've already said, Neil. I've already said that I have difficulty with that element of the recommendations from the committee.
So you would vote no.
And it's my job as a legislator to try and work towards a piece of legislation that I can support, and that's what I'll do.
What would you have an issue with?
But it's not
unrestricted or the period of time.
Neil, I am not going to talk through with you now the debate that may or may not take place after a referendum. What I've said is that one of the recommendations from the committee in relation to the 12-week issue, I have a problem with, and I would like to see more reassurance that the state is protecting an unborn child as well as protecting the health of a woman in pregnancy, and I'll work with my colleagues to try to get that right, just like a lot of the other people that you spoke to will also. But I'm not going to start predicting exactly what we're going to be voting on maybe in a year's time right now, just because you're looking to get a yes or no answer from me.
No, I did get an answer. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So I mean, I've given an answer on that. I've given a very long interview on it. But I have an issue with what's being proposed at the moment. But that is the job of a legislator, to try and amend and improve and change legislation to get it right.
Appreciate
but the point I'm making is that we can't do any of that if we don't vote yes in the referendum, because we will be stuck with the wording that we have today.
Appreciate you taking the call. We covered an awful lot of ground. Perhaps we might have an opportunity to talk in the coming weeks when maybe the green lights switched on for the convention centre. But Tanaiste, thanks for taking the call for now.
No worries, thanks.
Appreciate it. Simon Coveney, 1-850-104-106, 104-106, 104-106, 104.